Hello and welcome to the Courageous Leaders podcast. Today we have a special edition of Leadership Room 101, where I've invited three incredible leaders to join me to share with them what their frustration is with leadership that they would like to see banished forever. They will each get their turn to share what their thing is, and I will decide at the end which one out of the three will go into Leadership Room 101. So let me share with you who we've got in the studio today. First up, we have the brilliant Conrad Persons, President of Grey London. Welcome to the show. We also have the brilliant Jessica Tamsedge, CEO of Dentsu Creative. And then lastly, we have the wonderful Josh Green, Chief Creative Officer of House 337. Welcome to the show. We all ready? We're good to go. We are going to start with you, Conrad. I would love to know, what would you like to put into Leadership Room 101?
Thank you. I have a leadership style I would like to put into Room 101. And this style is what I call the black box style of leadership. So a glass box is transparent, a black box is not. So this is a style of leadership that keeps people guessing. I think there's something pernicious about a type of leader who you always guessing what they're thinking. If they do something, you're always wondering why. If there's information, they hoard it instead of share it. It's a kind of power and control and command style of leadership rather than an open and transparent and inspiring type of leadership. And I think it kind of runs counter to all of the values that I have and all of the things that I love, which is why I would like to banish it for all of time.
I can see the passion here.
I care. So I think one of the things that I've seen in certain leaders that I've learned from, or certain leaders that I've tried not to learn from, is a style that is, I would call it selfish with information and truth and insight and knowledge instead of generous. Yeah. It's one that creates potentially insecurity amongst a lot of team members because there's just not the transparency there in terms of what's happening. And some examples of this are, well, you don't know what good looks like, and it becomes a very subjective, murky world that you're living in, where you're trying to guess and anticipate what someone will like, versus being really open and transparent about what good looks like. So less about metrics and benchmarks and clarity, and more about guesswork, anticipation. What would Conrad think? You know, if people are running around saying that. That's not a good sign of a business. But I've seen a lot of organizations where people are constantly scurrying around going, what would Josh think? Or what would she? And that's just really, really bad. Yeah. And that, I didn't mean that literally. That was just an illustration.
Probably as bad.
And it creates a lot of spin and swirl. It creates this sense of guesswork. It's massively inefficient. And it's really egotistical, I think, as well, because you end up creating a system or an organization where the leadership is on a pedestal and it's pretty opaque, instead of, I think, leadership that feels flatter, more open. Doesn't mean it's not decisive, doesn't mean it doesn't make hard decisions, but you've at least got an understanding and a rationale for why those hard decisions are made. And so when I think about everything that's happening in leadership in terms of empathy, in terms of openness, in terms of fairness and equity, this system kind of runs counter to all of that, which is why I've submitted it humbly for banishment today.
It's one.
It's done. So you obviously know a lot about this. It feels like you've experienced this yourself. Have you been on the receiving end of a leader being like that?
I have. Yeah. So my first job was at an agency in New York, and the person will remain nameless. But I just remember walking in. It was already a really bad day because I'd worn a suit to my first day of work, which was a terrible idea. I was hideously overdressed, and someone thought I was the accountant here to check the books. But walk in and was asked to do a deck. And I said, sure. I didn't know what a deck was, so I'd ask what a deck went. And it just started this pattern of prove it to me, show me what you can do. There was no coaching, there was no encouragement. It was much more about me trying to guess at what this leader wanted and try to anticipate those needs. And it just it was a searing memory because it made me think, as I think about nurturing young talent, talk about what good looks like. Be really open. If you're going to set a high benchmark, at least be super clear about what that benchmark is. Share your insight and knowledge, which has been hard won because you're not trying to create an advantage for yourself over someone else. Be really mindful of power dynamics, just all of those things that I don't think that leader took into account. And it didn't help me develop. It didn't help me grow. Didn't help me feel particularly good about myself either. So it was just a case of not wanting that feeling to be passed on to anyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes when we experience it ourselves, that's when it actually helps us to make sure that definitely isn't the leader then we want to be. It helps us know who we want to turn into.
Absolutely.
I'd love to know, Jessica, have you come across this yourself?
Yes.
Yeah,
I agree with all the things you've said, and it also grates with my values and my belief in how a workplace should function. I think we've all seen black box leadership. I think it's motivated differently in different instances. Sometimes it's born out of a place of that leader themselves being a little insecure, not knowing what is going to allow them to have a clear space around their leadership, what is theirs to own and drive versus what should be shared. So sometimes that's an immaturity of leadership and an insecurity. In other times, it is just a sort of symptom of dysfunctional culture. I think the biggest impact that you described there is the impact on next generation talent, so those that need to learn and be brought into the fold, and on culture more broadly. You know, tone is set from the top, and if you have a leader that is not sharing or not talking about the things that they can't share, because not everything can be, you know, faced into and socialized, that second guessing, that feeling of not knowing, am I in the fold, am I not, is pervasive. And the second bench adopt that as a behavior because that is what good looks like. And you feel that I've definitely experienced it more in sort of from and to cultures where you've had one leader lead a certain way, and then you bring someone else in who leads just with total transparency and ease, and you feel that throughout the entire culture. So I think it's one of the biggest shapers of a workplace.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Josh, I'd love to know from your point of view, in terms of peers, you imagine like being on a leadership team and you recognise you've got this black box thinking on the leadership team. What's it like to have a peer that's doing that?
Yeah, I think it's really, really tricky because leadership teams at their best function as a collective, right? And it's really hard when everybody sort of has a different approach. You know, black box sort of leadership, I think actually can be quite an insidious thing and can actually infect, you know, an entire agency or an entire organization, because at a leadership level, it's really hard to isolate it to a certain individual. You sort of get painted, you know, across the board with that sort of way of doing things. So I think it actually can be quite a sort of insidious, insidious thing.
Yeah. So as a whole, it damages the whole, doesn't it? Even as the one.
Yeah.
It's interesting thinking because, you know, the black box is on aeroplanes. So, and I was trying to go, well, how does that go? And I was talking to my husband about it. It's like, yeah, well, actually, everything does get recorded. But then it's after the accident or the crash or the drama when you actually then find out what's going on. So for a lot of these leaders, you do find out, actually, if you'd have just told us here, if we'd have done this, and this actually wouldn't have happened. So is the behaviour's getting recorded, but we're finding out too late.
Totally. And I mean, just to, I think a lot of the sort of context of these conversations, because we're all agency people, sort of naturally sort of comes through that lens. I think one of the times that we also often see it is client side. And I think you can feel where there's black box leadership on a sort of brand that you're working on, right? Because I think one of the sort of hallmarks of that is you see people running around trying to please somebody, right? Often a very senior head of brand, or it could be a CMO or a CEO, right? And they're not actually sure what they're trying to do or why they're trying to do it, right? Yeah. And I think that is something that I'm sure we've all encountered, you know, throughout our careers, is that sort of black box leadership style, which makes it really difficult for agencies to actually produce great work.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds naff, but if everyone is clear on what the goal, what are you trying to achieve, what work are you trying to get onto the world, what problem you're trying to solve, a lot of that goes away. I think it is when there's that ambiguity around what is this shared goal that, you know, the trust isn't there, the lines of communications aren't open. Yeah, we've all felt it.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be nice, isn't it, to get to a place where you go, do you know, I don't know the answer. I think we all walk around going, we've got to get it right, we've got to do this, we've got to show up, we've got everything together. And it's actually, if everyone, even a client, anyone just went, do you know, at this point, I'm not sure. Can you help me out? I just don't know.
Absolutely. And going back to that first example that I talked about, it was my first job at Ogilvy, New York. there were a cluster of people, some of the smartest people I met, who kind of took me under their wing, kind of saw what was happening. And their ability to do just that, to ask naive questions, to admit that they weren't clear what was happening. And I held these people in such esteem. And so to hear them talk like that and be open about that and be openly confused and ask clarifying questions, even if it kind of diminished their standing, was very inspiring. And those are some people that I deeply admire.
I love that. Is it that you got final word on this?
No, I think it's such an unbelievably powerful trait of a leader, is to express what you don't know and be sort of humble and be honest and transparent with that. I think it's one of the most powerful traits that a leader can embody. So yeah, just wholeheartedly agree.
So if we were to allow black box thinking to go into Room 101, this more humble leadership, embracing the unknown, and just allowing everyone in is what we'd like to get to.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was a very, very good pitch, Conrad Persson.
Thank
It's
you
there,
very
it's
much.
registered, it's done. But I'm now going to go over to the wonderful Jessica. I would love to know, what would you love to enter into Leadership Room 101?
So I would love to enter the dabblers.
Ooh.
Now, this is something that I'm sure is probably quite self-explanatory to those, not just in our industry, but in any generally large workplace where there are layers and there are matrices and there are complexities. The dabblers are those who like the illusion of leadership. I think I was feeling quite punchy when I submitted this one. They are visible, they are touching projects, they are around the work, but they are neither doing and driving, nor are they owning their decisions and taking accountability. And it is a very, very almost expert sweet spot, to be honest, an art to play in the fringes of work. And
The art of dabbling.
the art, it is an
Like there's a
art.
book in this.
There's probably a school. There's probably a cohort we don't know about.
Yeah.
It's a subculture, and I almost admire them. But I think it is as dangerous as black box leadership, and there are many parallels. So it's born of the same things that black box leadership is. That psychological unsafety, that ego, that anxiety. But I think its impacts can be quite dramatic for that individual as well as for the wider culture. And you often see it come to bear, especially agency sides, on the highest stakes pursuits. So whether that's pitches, whether that's betting in new businesses, things that are very high profile, and you can attach individuals to their impact. And I think it's where it's most dangerous, it's most visible. And it's where I think we can also take action. Because I think much like we talked about with that vulnerability of leadership, just, say what you don't know as well as own your decisions. It's an invitation. Just what do you want your role to be in this? And I think people often can notice it because it's when leaders are showing up and you can't quite put your finger on where do you want to play on the team? What are you quarterbacking everyone? Are you leading from the front? Doesn't matter, but own that role. Pitches are really good examples of this because you often write a win strategy. How are we going to show up as a team? What are our values? What roles do we all need to play to set ourselves up as a collective to be successful? And I think in that moment, dabblers or not dabblers, own your pass. So I think that's something that I'd like to put in the room.
Nice.
Because, I think we could all do without it.
I can see it. I think you're ready for it to go.
I feel it,
You can
Jo.
feel it.
I think we all feel it.
I do.
We do.
I feel it.
And I just want to check if we have open honesty. Does anyone feel as they've come up the ladder that they have been a dabbler to maybe get where they wanted to get?
Good question.
I think, I'm going to say this on behalf of all of us and you disagree. We've probably all been inadvertent dabblers at points. And that's probably not been as intentional as that. But when you are not sure, and this is why it's symptomatic of a broader culture, if you're not clear on your role and what the business expects of you and how you can add value, I think people who want to be involved and want to be impactful will sooner be on the pitch than not. So there might have been inadvertent dabbling. Do you know what I mean?
I completely agree.
But it's a very different thing to intentionally trying to touch and look like you are on the scene.
Yeah.
So we are talking intentional dabblers.
I think it's good. It's a good qualification to make.
It is. Because I felt during certain, say, initial periods in some roles, I've probably dabbled.
Sure.
Unintentionally.
Yeah. You're let off.
Because you're kind of trying to find your way, which I have some sympathy with. But when there's a well-established leader dabbling,
No.
unacceptable.
You know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Look
And
at yourself.
it just creates all this ambiguity. People are kind of dancing around it. And And it dilutes the cohesion of a team considerably.
I agree. And I think the other symptom of a dabbler, an intentional dabbler, is that they will often manage up brilliantly. So they'll be very vocal and active in their reassurance that stuff is okay. We are on track. Things are good. And that is the most dangerous thing, because usually they're not. Usually that means that problems aren't resolved soon enough. And if you're working on a high stakes project, problems need to be lent into early. And so if you've got someone that's both not bringing clarity and saying it's all right, you've got a situation.
You do.
It would drive me crazy, this managing up stuff. I had someone who was so good at managing up. I'd see them be going out for dinners and drinks when I'm back in the office, like doing all the work, and they're doing all the schmoozing. And they've done incredibly well from it. It has worked for a lot of people, this intentional dabbling, but I think for everybody else, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth. It's like, hang on, this doesn't feel like teamwork here. You're trying to take all the glory for this. But I know it's a sidetrack. This managing up is a whole skill in itself. I think
another art.
Intentional dabblers are very, very good at. What's been your experience, Joe?
So, I mean, I'd like to coin the term a Bobby dabbler. Maybe that's a bad thing to be, a Bobby dabbler. What I think dabbling, Conrad, your point totally resonates with me, which is that especially people that are into sort of new leadership positions, it can be a really difficult thing to sort of manage, to sort of where to pitch somebody's sort of involvement in something. And I think, you see sort of two often sort of mistakes. Either people pitch their sort of involvement at the ground level, and it's too ground level, and basically you're doing the work that other people, fundamentally should be doing and want to do and are probably better at doing than we might be, or you're pitching at too high level and you're just not involved, and you're just sitting somewhere sort of in the clouds. And I think it can be really, really hard, especially for organizations, not just people who are sort of into new roles, but also organizations that are probably going through change. And I think one of the sort of natural tendencies of leaders is to want to fix things and want to stabilize things. And, when you see a problem or you see a fire, you sort of run towards it, I think is the natural instinct of people. And I think sort of going against some of those natural instincts and finding the right role where you can, help a project or a team succeed by empowering other people is a massively important thing. But a lot of time that only comes with a sense of stability within an organization and experience, in the role that you're doing. Yeah,
it's the internal stability. Is that I work a lot with people saying, right, your internal world, your external world. And if we only know our external world, we're going to keep seeking validation from other people. And I actually go, if we think about, well, what could be done to help dabblers? One, I kind of go, I don't think there's been actually, I'm trying to think in my career, any open conversation about, do you know what it is to be a dabbler? Like actually setting a benchmark of, if you're involved, this is what we expect, this is what we do not accept. Like, I just don't think people know. And I think so many people go, well, I need to be seen. So I need to look like I'm busy, or I need to look like, so I don't think actually we talk about enough those expectations. And I think, the first one, the black box thinking and dabbling, so much of it we've said comes from insecurity. So wondering just like, what's an organisation's responsibility to help people feel secure?
I was in a conversation yesterday with an organisation that works with Team GB. They had one of the Olympians involved, and they were talking about the difference in sort of corporate culture and sporting cultures. And sporting cultures are very big on constant, real-time, in-person, in-the-face feedback. And we are, British corporate cultures, more averse to that. So we do not take as much time and care to have that continuous dialogue around how am I doing, what are my strengths, what am I brilliant at. People fear that, both giving the feedback and receiving it. And I think there's something in that which, I don't believe anyone's born a dabbler. But I think I think there's something that might be bred through insecurity or not having those feedback conversations about their strengths, so that they can go, okay, I identify as the person that's brilliant at doing this. I can transparently and wholeheartedly lean into that. And instead, you have people then living in the shadows because they've never had that conversation. What's the best role for me to play on the field? So I think it's it comes back to feedback culture.
I completely agree. I think lack of honest conversations is at the root of so much of this, because you see it. You're watching someone dabble, and but no one goes up and goes, "What's your role?" or "What would you like your role to be?" you just kind of
You
let
accept
them,
it, don't you?
Yes. I don't know if being a spectator to dabbling is also being
I think we're
complicit in dabbling.
complicit. I think we're complicit, yeah. It's a whole other...
You've got all these
shade
tiers of dabbling
crime.
now. You've got unintentional dabbling,
Well,
intentional
this is
dabbling,
I've got a
complicit.
whole
Saw
book
it.
in this. Because have you ever, interesting, because it's obviously something that we notice and frustrates us, but has anyone ever called it out?
Yes.
What happened?
I don't think you ever call it out in the sense of shit or get off the pot.
Yeah.
You know, having those conversations, you don't have it as bluntly as like that, and you don't have it in a way that is personal. But I think I've had conversations around, can we all be really clear on what role we want to play? When are we passing batons? When do we all want to be involved? It's a more emotional version of a racy to be like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to be? And then do that consistently, because it's the inconsistency that gets me.
Yeah.
It's, you know, there's a pursuit of visibility, but there's also this, it's getting a bit sharp. It's getting closer to the product. We're talking about the work. Okay, and then suddenly that opacity comes back again. So I think having those conversations to go, this, not you, this feels a bit unclear. How can we hold hands on how we're going to get ourselves over the finishing line? And they're good. They're constructive conversations.
And it's making it not personal, is it? It's about the project. It's about what we're doing, not about you or the roles. It's about what's best for what we're doing on the table right now. Any final words on dabblers before we move on to the next one?
Don't be a dabbler.
Don't be a dabbler.
Don't be complicit.
Yeah.
Don't be dabbling. Don't be complicit.
Don't watch somebody else dabble.
I've got a lot to think about.
You're all day now. You're just going to watch out for dabblers today, isn't it? It's just going to be on your radar massively. But thank you, dabblers is very much there now with Black Box Thinking. And we're going to do the last one. Josh Green, what would you like to put in Leadership Room 101?
There's a lot of pressure because we've got two brilliant entries and they've all been framed in quite a nice way, right? So we've got Black Box Thinking, we've got dabbling. I'm gonna put forward something that I'm calling empty growth.
Empty growth.
Empty growth. My pitch to you and the table is that as an industry, we are obsessed by growth, right? Fundamentally. And I don't just mean sort of the advertising industry. I mean sort of broader industry and its sort of macro sense. And this pursuit of growth, I think fundamentally comes at a cost. And I think we are very reluctant to assess the honest cost of growth. And when I think about growth, I think of the costs probably in three different ways. I think about the cost to creativity, right? It's really hard to scale brilliant creativity, right? So there is a sort of naturally inverse relationship between growth and quality of work, unless it's sort of managed the right way, right? So there's a cost to creativity. I think there's a cost to people, right? And that's obvious, right? You know, growth without, consideration for people fundamentally is just a sort of game of extraction, right? Fundamentally, that's really what that is. So there's a cost to people. And then finally, there's a cost to culture, right? And I think we've all been around agencies or companies that have grown too fast. And all of a sudden, you've created this sort of empire, but it's a sort of empire that nobody really wants to live in or be part of or work in. So I think the cost to growth is something that leaders, not just across our industry, but across sort of businesses, don't consider enough. And we don't have enough of those sort of honest conversations about not just how to grow, but how to grow the right way. And I totally appreciate there's lots of external factors that contribute to why that is the case. I mean, I've been in big network agencies most of my entire life, so I'm very sympathetic to the sort of to the reasons why that's difficult. But I think we don't often, in my experiences, we don't often assess the cost of growth in the way that we should. And that's something that I think as leaders we ought to do more of. And I guess the really simple way that I think about it is that better is always the way to bigger, right? And I think we get sort of, it's very easy to start with how do we get bigger while maintaining standards, right? I think every place that I've been that's grown the right way has always started with how do we make it better, right? And then very naturally, if you do that right, you get to bigger. And that's where you get to this this notion of sustainable growth. So
I couldn't agree more. And do you find as well the same, that there's a real damage at the moment, that this ambition to grow, the cost for that fast growth without looking after your culture at the same time? Have you got the same experience?
Yeah, I mean, I really like this stream of thinking. I'll try not to dabble in this conversation. It's a hugely important one to me, and I find it extraordinary how rarely people ask why they want to grow. So I think wanting to grow is a completely natural human thing, and it's basically a bit of a requirement in our industry. But why? If a business that says they want to grow for the sake of growth versus a business that says they want to grow for the sake of rewarding people and doing better work and playing on a bigger stage, those businesses will have two entirely different paths, I think. They may have the same revenue figures and KPIs and metrics, but the quality of the culture, the quality of the work and creativity, and I would argue the quality of the people in terms of the care that you provide them, I think could be radically different. So sometimes it's as simple as asking, why are we doing this and why do we seek to grow? That can put you on a very different trajectory, even if you still want to hit those same benchmarks.
Yeah, really nice. How about you?
Agree. It is top of mind. I mean, it's a long time since I've complained about any shape of growth, to be honest. But like when I started my role at Dentsu, we set 3 priorities, and one of them was good growth. So simplify the business, get upstream with our partnerships, and seek only good growth. And by that we meant, is anything that we're going after, any advertiser, any client, any partner, do they have a shared ambition for their brand? Because then it's less about growth. It's your why point. It's do we want to put something into the world that we both feel good about and is going to move that brand forward. It was also about your point, Joe, on is what we're going to be left with afterwards going to be sustainable and good for culture, for people? Is it commercially viable? And we put 3 really simple criteria down. We just said fame, fun, fortune for us and for our clients and their brands. Are we going to build this brand for fame and drive effectiveness and all the growth that follows from that? Are we all going to have a brilliant time doing it? And in doing so, nurture the culture, nurture our people? And fortune should follow. Will it? Is it possible with the maths that we're doing now? Because I think there's an itch we all want to scratch in this industry, which is there's a dopamine hit that comes with winning a thing. And, we are all very privileged to be asked. But it was one of the most uncomfortable things I did in this role when we pivoted about a year into starting to say no to opportunities because they didn't meet those criteria. And it was partly going, why are we growing? But it was also going, does this serve our agenda? If we win this thing, is it going to dilute our ability to make the shape of work we want to? And given our other agenda was all around simplifying the business, is it the type of thing we want to be known for? And asking those hard questions up front because it never leads to a good thing if you just sort of go, yes, I'll deal with it later.
So I know, if you don't mind me unpicking that a little bit, I know there'll be some people listening going, I'd love to say no. I'd love to. But I don't feel I can. We've got salaries to pay. We lost the last pitch. We've just, we've got people breathing down our necks for growth targets and stuff. What advice can you give of what have you learned in your own leadership where you've been able to go, I could say no? And what did you have in place that helped you say no?
I think it's just owning your decisions. So it doesn't matter if it is in some instances, a more commercially driven decision because it maybe serves the network that you're working in. There is a broader story that you're a part of. But own that and talk transparently to the black box point about your people, about why you're going for something. In other instances, you want to go after a brand because you care passionately about where that brand is headed and you want to make brilliant work that will shift that brand forward. And it might not be the most commercially viable and it's not going to be the thing that pays everybody else's wages. And own and say out loud that you're making that decision too. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. It's just about taking the time up front to go, why are we doing this against those 3 or whatever those criteria are and hold hands once you've made that decision.
Nice. I say that collective, even if there's some people that don't agree, you will actually come together to go, actually, this is how we're going to move forward. I'd love to know, has there been a time where, have you got an example where that empty growth has happened and you just like, it was the worst decision we ever made and oh my gosh, that's what happened?
Yes.
Lots.
So it's probably quite like, I think there's cautionary tales all over the industry about this. One cautionary tale, not my personal experience, but like when Jurga opened in Sydney, God, 10 years ago, I think. They had just sort of, they were the New York sort of hot shop, right? And they had a very specific brand of creativity, and it was David Druga's Homeland and Homecoming, and there was huge expectations on, that brand and that market to do something remarkable, and not just for the agency, but for the sort of creative industry. I remember them winning, I think it was Woolworths, which is obviously a hugely heavy sort of retail brand, and sort of not at the time, what you thought of a sort of prototypical Droga client that would allow them to make the type of work that made that agency famous, right? And I think they saw a huge opportunity, right? A brand that had scale that would allow them to fast track growth overnight. But what they became overnight was a brand, an agency brand, full of people that specialized in a very specific type of work that was antithetical to, the sort of, the origin story of Droga, and what sort of made that, such a brilliant brand, especially in the US. And to be honest, they never really recovered from it. They never really kind of came back from it. And that to me is the ultimate sort of cautionary tale of growth. And, because growth begets growth. And, once you sort of start going sideways on these things, right? All of a sudden, it's like, who's the next client that you're attracting with the work that you're doing? Yeah. So it's really, really important to be selective with how you grow. And that's not just the brands or the clients, it's the type of work that you do, that you want to be known for. And to me, that's a really interesting cautionary tale. From a personal standpoint, I've been in this space before. Like, I remember trying to pitch for work at my last place. I want to incriminate my current place. We can cut that. I sort of remember, like, there's a conversation that we always have, I think, as agency leaders, is like, can we do this, right? And I think that's a really, we ought to pause when somebody asks that. It's like a massive red flag, right? Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? Can we do this? Do we do this, right? What do we need to be able to win this, right? And all of a sudden, I think that is alarm bells going off in my head. It's like, okay, should we consider, is this right for us, right? If we win this, right, what do we have to do? Does it change the fundamental shape of an agency, right? Does it sort of stack the balance in some way that doesn't feel like it's actually fit for the future in terms of how we want to grow? Does it change the fundamental DNA of a place? And I think I've been in, those cases where we've actually managed to win something that, in retrospect, I really wished we hadn't, because it sort of weighted the agency in a way that that sort of changed the fundamental DNA of it, right? And we had really great people leave because, to be honest, it wasn't the place that they thought it was, and it wasn't doing the type of work that they'd signed up to do. So that is the cost of growth, right? In a way. And again, we're in a really difficult environment. I totally get it. I'm a sort of very sympathetic and pragmatic in a way. But all I'm suggesting is that we ought to ask the question more than we do. Not that we ought to turn things down, and but we just ought to ask the question.
Better.
Yeah. I like that practice of writing the press release, or imagined or otherwise, before you say yes to a thing. Like, what would you want? Not industry press, not talking to our peers, but what would we like the story to be that of what we've achieved together with this brand? Would our people feel good about it? Would we have moved that brand forward? Would you
be trying to bury the story?
Or would we be trying to bury the story,
totally hide the case study,
and just not talk about it? And if you cannot hold hands up, because I don't mind the question of can we do this? I know your point is, when you're asking can we do it, because you'd have to change in a negative direction, sure. But I like that slight anxiety of can we do this, because it feels scary. I want to be sick. I don't know if we've ever done anything like this before. If that story at the end feels energizing and in the direction you're already pulling,
brilliant.
But if you can't, then I think that's your light bulb moment to go. It's probably not the one.
Something I talk about a lot, just be interesting to get your take on this, is I've got a belief that if you have connection plus performance, that's where you'll get growth. Because I really feel like if you can be connected to yourself, connected to your team, connected to your company's environment, their vision and their mission, that connection alone can help you go through these twists and turns of how your story might change or how you want to stretch and grow. And then if you've got that connection, you're going to then have the performance, because everyone's going to be wanting to perform and do well. So when now and again you've got those 3 pitches that come in and it's like, we've got to do it and it's hard and it's difficult, but the connection's there so everyone's performance can come up, which ultimately then means the people are growing and the company can grow at the same time. And I just wonder a lot with kind of empty growth that we're just not putting those foundations in place enough to then go when these opportunities come in to have the right conversations. Again, if we've got black box thinking going on, we've got dabblers coming on, we haven't set those standards. Do you feel like sometimes you'd like just to have a day where you can just go, let me just look at our foundations. Let me just take a step back and just do a bit of a what's working, what's not working, and just hit the reset button sometimes.
Yes, I think a lot of us would love that. You can sleepwalk into decisions really, really easily. And to your point on empty growth, you can default mode into, of course I'm going to take that pitch, or of course we're going to take on that client, or of course we're going to seize that opportunity, because you're not necessarily connecting back to me with some of those founding principles that you have, right? So you talked about your criteria, which I love. Is this going to help us be the agency we want to be? Is my future self going to thank me for this? Is something you often say. And if you just pause sometimes to connect with some of those founding principles, if you have that kind of collective sense of who we are and where we're going, you probably ask yourself more uncomfortable questions. But when you skip all of that and you just do, you just find yourself in a place you kind of go, how did I get here? Because you just kind of drifted into a place rather than being really intentional about why you got there. And so, I do agree.
Yeah. I think that foundation, because how often, do you get much time to think out of interest?
I increasingly force time to think. I think we've probably been in our roles similar amounts of times. I think the first year for me was certainly not quite sleepwalking, but you're just awash with all the decisions that can be made around you and working out, pick your battle, which one can I shape, which one can I change? And your day can just be filled up with fires to put out, things to respond to. No one's going to give you that time. So unless you decide, someone gave me really brilliant advice once, which is quite simple, but just do the things only you can do. And a lot of that is, you are the only one that can set a different direction. You're only one that can set a lens for what we go after versus what we don't. You can't do that unless you've got time. So I actually do try to carve out time on a Friday to just do that. What have we stumbled into this week? What do we probably need to regroup as a leadership team to just pause on?
Question I love at the moment is I get to the end of the week and I'm like, what have I learned this week? And what do I want to do? What's that 1% I want to do different next week? And I give you set. How about you? Do you give yourself much time?
I wish I gave myself more, to be honest with you. I think I try to protect time on a Friday, for example, where I can actually just take stock, inventory, look back, try to look ahead, a little bit. But the honest answer is it's just really hard, right? The reality is like, when you're in a role and there's a responsibility for lots of clients and lots of people, and time is the hardest thing to come by. So and I think there's a sort of guilt factor also, right? Like I know when you do take that time, and I'm saying not necessarily that it's the right feeling, but you do everything comes at an opportunity cost, right? The time that I'm spending thinking about something or taking stock or taking even personal reflections comes at a cost for what you could be doing with that time, whether that's spending it with people that you manage or whether that's spending it with different clients. So I think it's quite a brave thing, to be honest, to be able to make that time and take that time. And on a personal level, I wish I was better at that.
No, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being honest, because I think when I speak to leaders, it is the one thing is they want time, but the guilt, I do hear guilt comes up a lot. And the only thing that's always helped me is to go, do you know what, if I don't put my oxygen mask on first, I can't actually be there for my team. So if I keep running around doing, actually the decisions I'm making, as you say, you just like sleepwalk into stuff. The time I'm spending with them is actually good time versus if I'd just given myself 20 minutes to think, how effective would that time be? But it's one of the biggest challenges I think leaders have got right now, and how to come off that hamster wheel and that cycle. So if we did put empty growth into Leadership Room 101, you might get a little bit of time back. Maybe if you weren't spending time on empty growth things.
It's quite a selfish sort of submission
Yes,
to
help
the
me.
jury.
On a Friday morning. Leave me alone.
Help me. So what I'd love to do, thank you so much for bringing that into the table. I'd love to now just hear a quick top line. Why should I pick your thing to go into Leadership 101? And Conrad, I'll start with you.
Closing arguments.
Closing arguments, here we go.
I think a world without black box leadership is a world with more transparent leadership, more humility, and more growth. And what I mean by growth is multifold, not just growth as in the top line, but personal growth. I think black box leadership stunts the growth and development of others. I think it erodes trust. I think it erodes that connectedness that you mentioned before. And ultimately, I think it keeps more people down rather than lifting them collectively up. And for that reason, I think it should be gone.
That was a good closing statement, I've got to admit. Beat that one. Come on.
So for the same reasons you'd like to ban black box leadership, I would like to ban the dabblers. I don't think we have enough time or the luxury of having layers of people and a lack of clarity around impact to justify it. And I also don't think, especially on the creative side of the industry, that there is enough complexity in our business model to warrant it. I honestly think you know the shared and common goal is to turn brilliant ideas into actionable brands that move themselves and their markets forward. So get on the tools or bring the best out of teams or be the connector that's bringing the best of your wider network, your technology, your media solutions, whatever it is, but own your role within that. And that simple question to everybody should remove the dabblers. So maybe they don't even need to go in the room. Maybe they can just talk to themselves. I don't know. There's a lot of self-reflection here today. I think we might be.
I do feel sorry. I feel so sorry.
No, I don't know either.
We don't.
I feel so sorry for the dabblers who listen to this. The dabblers you're going to see today.
There's nothing personal here.
It's brilliant.
There's no shade.
And over to you, Josh.
Okay, I'm going to exile empty growth, or in the pursuit of empty growth, and my sort of argument, sort of final argument, as you've called it, is a human argument. Fundamentally, is that we are all in this industry to create amazing work. Fundamentally, I think if we wanted to run big corporations or just chase a paycheck, there are plenty of other places to do that. We are here all because we want to create amazing work. And I think the pursuit of better, right, as opposed to bigger, is just it is the philosophical perspective to me that brings joy into being in this industry and sort of reminds me of all of the brilliant reasons why I got into it in the first place, right? So the pursuit of the right type of growth is really, to me, just a commitment to the work and doing better work. And hopefully that does eventually lead to growth in the right time.
They were good. Like, hang on, I feel like I've got to put a little judge's hat on or something now. I feel like I'm in like a proper law. Right, so my decision I'm going to make, and the reason why I've got to this decision is I am going to pick black box thinking to go into Leadership 101. The reason being is I think if we removed black box thinking, we'd actually, dabblers wouldn't really be able to exist at the moment, because we'd be having more candid, open conversation. We'd have more transparency, which would know what's going on. So very quickly, a dabbler would come in the room and probably go, I need to remove myself here. I've actually realised, what am I doing here?
Self-selection.
Why am I here? And then I do think if the black box thinking would solve that, so the dabblers aren't so much around, we wouldn't actually make the decisions we're making around empty growth, because that reason of why, what's our origin story, what's our principles, what's going to be the story afterwards. If that black box thinking wasn't there, I think those conversations would be more natural and supportive, and everyone would be more of a collective rather than owning their empire and their fiefdom. And we're just going after stuff because people's egos and things thinks we should do stuff. So I was trying to, you see my people-pleasing hat come off to go like,
We've all won. Everyone's a winner.
but the one that is going in the room,
Agreed.
a massive round of applause to Conrad
Congratulations.
Persons, is Black Box Thinking. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. This is our first time doing Leadership Room 101, and I picked you all because I have so much respect and care for you all. So thank you for joining me today on
Feelings
our first
mutual.
every
Oh,
time.
yes,
It's been
Jo.
so
Thanks,
much
Jo.
fun. Love it. But thank you, and hopefully we can go for coffee. We're all breathe now.
Have a lie down.
We're gonna have a lie
Solve
down
the
now. We've done it.
industry.
We've done it. But thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you've got some wonderful insights from this conversation. And please message me. I'd love to know, what would you like to enter in Leadership Room 101? We'll see you next week. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.